Hey, welcome everyone to another episode of the Legends of Sport podcast. I'm your host, Andy Bernstein. This episode's guest is someone who I share a long history with, all the way back to the start of my career in the early 80s, shooting Lakers and Kings games, tennis, indoor volleyball and soccer, and occasional concerts at the fabulous Forum. Her name is Claire Rothman. Claire ran the Forum. There was no doubt about that. She was originally hired in 1975 by Jack Kent Cooke and became the president and general manager under Dr. Jeanie Buss until 1995. Claire was deeply involved in the creation of Showtime and responsible for the success of the Forum as the premier sports and entertainment venue in the world. I know some people might argue that Madison Square Garden held that title, but those of us who worked under Claire and experienced the magical environment of the Forum will definitely agree it was an amazing place to work and attend an event. We had a great conversation about how she started at the Spectrum in Philadelphia and became the only female executive running a major sports and entertainment venue in the country. We talk about the HBO series Winning Time, and Claire says how she feels about her disappointment of how the personalities we all knew as family are portrayed as basically cartoons in this show. I couldn't agree more. So enjoy this conversation with the legendary Claire Rothman, one of the true icons in our business and someone I am so grateful to call my friend. And as always, I'll see you on the backside. You are truly a trailblazer. As you know, the first woman to head a major entertainment and sports venue. You've been a mentor, a friend, an example to so many, not just women, of course, but men in your business over, so many years. I'm not going to say how old you are, but it's just unbelievable to me how wonderful you look. And I guess life and retirement is really working out for you and Ed pretty well.
Yes, well, we've been doing this. We've been practicing since '99.
Right. There you go. That makes sense.
So we've got it down pat.
Yeah.
And feel free to say my age. I'm proud of it.
Well, you told me you're 93, and
Yes.
and Ed is your younger husband. And a couple of years younger. And I related a story to you yesterday that I had an aunt that got her driver's license renewed at 93, and she lived to one day before her 106th birthday. So, I don't know about some of the women in my life that have been so healthy and hardy and active, well into their 80s and 90s. Is amazing. Claire, before we get into your history, all right, could we talk a little bit about our history? All right.
Yes.
Okay. So what do you remember about the young Andy Bernstein running around the Forum back in the early days of Showtime? Do you have any memories of me at all of those days?
Yes, this streak that went by all the time with a big smile and a happy young man who just kept developing and developing into the marvelous photographer that you are today.
Well, I appreciate that so much. I had a little bit of an edge to me, coming from Brooklyn as a Brooklyn guy. You're an East Coaster, you're like Philly born and bred. So, you kind of can relate to that. But I have to say, Claire, not just because you're here and, we're talking on my podcast, but it really, if it wasn't for you and Lee Zeidman and certain individuals there at the Forum, Josh Rosenfeld and John Black, Jeanie, of course. I mean, I owe a lot of my career and a lot of my self-confidence to the fact that I was welcomed into the world of the family of the Forum, Lakers and Kings and California sports and everything. So I have to thank you for that. I don't think I ever really expressed that to you because I always felt like I was kind of a pest.
No.
Because I was asking things all the time from you. So
I think the secret to all of our success is the fact that we were a family.
Yes.
And we protected one another and helped one another.
Yeah.
and cared for one another.
Yeah.
So
That's absolutely correct. I totally agree with you. So Claire, let's talk about your history. Okay. You grew up in Philadelphia area, right?
yes,
You worked in your first husband's business for a long time. You helped to build that business that was, very successful hotel and hospital supply business, correct?
yes,
So that's kind of where you got your feet wet in business?
yes.
Or did you have mentors before that, like your parents or anybody in your family?
Well, uh, I had the opportunity to know what happens when a business is good and when a business isn't good,
Mhm.
when you have problems, and that you rely on the fact that there were better days. So you always look forward.
Mhm.
And that's what I brought with me.
Interesting. So how did the whole experience at the Spectrum, how did that come about? How were you hired? Like, what was that?
Well, this is I have a lot of fabulous stories, but this is a wonderful story.
Yeah.
Someone convinced me to go for an interview.
Mhm.
And I made all kinds of excuses, but I finally agreed.
Mhm.
And there I met this fabulous man, Hal Freeman, who had been a journalist and was very widely known in Philadelphia.
Mhm.
And he was the president of the Spectrum.
Mhm.
We had an interview where we just dovetailed, we clicked on every point. And he offered me the job, but at less money. And I said, not a penny less.
Less than you wanted, or less than a man would have been offered, or both? What? No, really, what was it? Was it less than you had anticipated, or if you were a man going in for that job, do you think you would have gotten the money you had wanted?
Probably.
Yeah, especially in those days.
He
Yeah.
came around
Mhm.
and called me in the next morning, and he said, I'm not going to let you go. You can have every penny you want. And it wasn't a big deal.
That's awesome.
So I was hired as a bookkeeper.
Uh-huh.
And 10 days after I took the job, the company went into bankruptcy. And I was very nervous about that because I had a son in college just starting and a daughter in high school. And I was newly divorced. And so I thought, well, there's no place to go but up. So I started. And I found that there were no books or records. All the bills that had been had come in the first couple of months that they were open and prior were all in boxes. So we had no way of knowing what did we owe.
Right.
I got an idea that the one that had the most to gain by knowing it was the bank that had the construction loan.
Mhm.
And there was an officer of the bank named John Pilovitz. I hope he's still with us today. And he sent me a group of men to enter all the bills.
Oh.
So now the trustees in bankruptcy saw that they had someone that knew what she was doing.
Mhm.
And they said, well, we're going to make you the office manager. So that was, I think, 9 days later.
Oh my God.
No. Within 9 months, I was made the business manager
Amazing.
of the Spectrum. It was a wonderful time. We did great things, and we did something that is rarely done. We paid 100 cents on the dollar to come out of bankruptcy. And although our plan to take it out was not accepted, and they gave it to Snyder, who owned the Kings, the judge who I believe was one of the first Black federal judges, Judge Leon Higginbotham. He said, I'm going to give it to you, Mr. Snyder, to take it out. But if you want it, you're going to have to pay 100 cents on the dollar, not the 10 cents you offered.
Yeah. Wow.
So he was forced to do that.
Yeah.
And I knew my time would be limited because I caused that to happen.
Wow. Did the Spectrum become profitable while you were there? I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah.
How could we have paid it off?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you had the Flyers. That was the Broad Street Bullies days, right?
Yes.
Which being a Ranger fan, I have to tell you, we hated them, but that's another story. And then the Sixers started playing in the Spectrum, yes. Right? And you were booking concerts and all that. Now, yes. were you involved in the booking as well at the Spectrum?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Oh,
all right.
Yes.
All right. So that.
I did all the booking.
Yeah.
And the scheduling, not for the 76ers because they weren't Arabs.
Yeah.
But for the basketball team.
Yeah. So Claire, I have to ask you, I know you went after the Spectrum, you were there about 5 years, right? Then you went to Wild Kingdom in Florida, which is probably a whole other podcast. But then you end up opening the Richfield Coliseum, right? In Cleveland, which to me was the most insane place on the planet, or at least in America, to put an arena, right? I mean, it was described, I heard you talk about it being like a mud hole, you know? It's like, I got to relate this story to you. The first time, in probably my second year working for the NBA, this is like 82, 83, they said, go to Cleveland, you know, just rent a car at the airport and go to the Richfield Coliseum. I don't know where Richfield is. And I asked the Avis guy, and he goes, you get on the highway, and then you get off the highway, and you're on a dirt road, literally on a dirt road through a cornfield, and there you're going to see the arena. And I'm thinking, this can't possibly be where a professional sports team is located, you know? But lo and behold, that was it. I mean, it must have shocked you too that they were putting the arena there.
Was if we located halfway between Cleveland and Akron,
right,
that we would draw from both parts.
I mean, it was a good thought, but
it was a good thought.
Yeah. But the town of Richfield had one hotel, as you remember, and one restaurant. It had a Holiday Inn, and I think it had a Denny's. It's like, it's crazy. Anyway, so after that experience, talk about, please, because I'm not totally clear on how the whole forum thing came about, how you met Jack Kent Cooke, did he reach out to you and all that? So if you can give us the background on that.
Well, Jack Kent Cooke was the original owner of the Lakers and the Kings. And he built, under his auspices, he built the Forum, which was a very classical looking building. And it can never be taken away because it has a historical place. Right. He became friendly with Charlie Joasis, who had been an executive vice president at the Madison Square Garden. He said he was interested in proposing Charlie to be a commissioner of the NBA. And he said to Charlie, who's the best manager in the country? And Charlie said, Claire Rothman. He said, who's she? And he explained. And he said, well, my manager is leaving to go to Madison Square Garden, and I'm going to call her. So I get a call, and he said, this is Jack Kent Cooke, Ms. Rothman. And I said, hello, Jack. He said, no, you call me Mr. Cooke.
Oh, boy.
The men all called him Jack, but the woman had to call him Mr. Cooke. And he invited me to come to California to interview. And I said, well, send me a ticket, because I knew his reputation. And he said, I guarantee you, Miss Carmung, my secretary, will have a check for you when you arrive.
Oh boy.
So I took the chance and I left. And I met with him at his home in Bel Air on St. Cloud, a beautiful street and a lovely area.
Yeah.
The only trouble was being a Canadian and wanting to wear the same clothing in Southern California, he kept the temperature about 55 in the house. And he had come from Cleveland and I hadn't quite adjusted to all the snow and the sleet in Cleveland. Right. And marrow in my bones started to freeze in that house. We talked about everything in the world except my background. Mm-hmm. And then after several hours, he brought his wife in at the time, and he displayed her as if she were 3 years old. Hey. Turn around, dear, and show Ms. Rothman your dress.
Hey.
I thought, oh, what am I going to get into?
Right.
His chauffeur took me to my son, who was then in Caltech and living in the Pasadena area. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, he had nothing in his little apartment to give me to defrost my marrow. But he said, well, what do you think, Mother? And I said, oh, this man's a male chauvinist pig. He's never going to hire me.
Right.
And I went back to Cleveland to find that my apartment had been robbed.
No way. Wow.
It's off. So I thought, well, that might be a good sign that if this came through, I should leave. Within a week, Mr. Cooke called me and he said, well, when are you coming to work? And I said, well, we didn't talk about particulars. So we went through the same thing again and I went out again. Yeah. And I met his vice president and I took the job.
Wow. That's
how it all started. And my title was general manager of the building.
Right. So what were the early days of the Forum like? Pre-Showtime, pre-Dr. Buss. Like what was it like back then?
Well, basketball was only drawing between 8,000 and 9,000 people. Mm-hmm. The seats on the court, which now go in excess of $1,000 a seat per game, were $10.50.
Yeah.
Team tennis, which was rather popular at that time, was playing in the sports arena. So I thought it would be a good idea if I could get the owner. So I found out who the owner was. Mm-hmm. And it was a man named Jeanie Buss. And I knew nothing about him. Mm-hmm. And I called. And for some reason, he took my call. And I was very bold and said, why are you playing in that shithole called the sports arena when you could be playing in the fabulous Forum? And he said, oh, I couldn't afford the Forum.
Yeah.
I said, well, if you come over and meet with me, I'll show you how you can do it. And you'll be in a house of champions. Mm-hmm. And it was just an excuse.
Yeah.
He came. Uh-huh. And I sold him a box that we had in the Forum at that time. And he told me about his love of basketball. And he had a PhD. And I thought, Jack Kent Cooke would like to meet him. He's this kind of man.
Yeah.
So I introduced them, and the three of us had lunch together. And thus began it all.
That's amazing, Claire. I never had heard that story. So you would pretty much the matchmaker.
I was. And I used to tease Jerry. I said, I introduced you and I never got a finder's fee.
Right, exactly. Well, I had somebody on the podcast recently who was the historian for Nike. He worked for Nike for 30 years. They paid the person who designed the Nike swoosh logo $35. So, so we all know how that works, right?
Yes.
So Claire, you worked with the biggest acts in music, entertainment. I mean, you rubbed elbows with people from, every celebrity imaginable, right?
Yes.
Was there ever a moment when you didn't feel that you weren't really taken seriously enough because you were a woman in this powerful position, which is really like, entertainment, especially in those days, was more of a man's world, right? Dealing with promoters and all that, how was that experience for you?
Well, I didn't so much feel as I wasn't taken seriously because I was. Mm-hmm. And Jerry always made that clear. Mm-hmm. If somebody came to him and said, Jerry, I've got this group that I belong to and I'd like to rent the forum. He said, wait a minute, I can't do that. The only person that can do that is Claire Rothman. So he established that. Mm-hmm. But I often felt that my remuneration was less than somebody else in my position because I was a woman.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, did you feel that your entire career there, or did that ever catch up at some point, or,
Oh, yes, it caught up.
Okay. That's good to hear.
After a few years, because Jeanie Buss made me a vice president of California sports the day he took over, because he said it will be helpful to you to have that vice presidency in your dealings with everyone.
Yeah.
And he was right.
Wow.
His stature.
Yeah.
So there came a time when I was getting restless. Mm-hmm. How am I going to get ahead? I'm already at the top,
Right.
And how could I translate what I know into some other business? So I wrote him a one-page memo, which was the direction. He never read the second page of a letter or the second page of the memo. You had to be concise. And I compared myself to people in New York and in Detroit and Chicago. And I said, I am seriously underpaid. And he wrote back on the same memo, you're comparing yourself to Lou Baumeister, who is president of California Sports. And that was it. But 2 weeks later, he called me and he said, can you meet me at Pick Fair? Jerry bought Pick Fair.
Yeah.
And one of the very first charitable endeavors that we had at Pick Fair, he did in favor of City of Hope because he knew of my involvement. And it was just a beautiful thing. And I ran the whole thing on the property of Pick Fair, which was like a fairy tale.
Yeah.
So I met him at his charming small library in Pick Fair. And we had lunch. But the moment he walked in the room, still standing, he said, if I raised you $100,000, would you be happy? And I hesitated a moment to get my breath.
Yeah.
And I said, yes. And then he said, but you can't ask for a raise next year. So Jeanie Buss always was the winner, and he had to be a winner then.
Yeah.
But whoever got $100,000 raise?
Well, it says to me many things. One, that Dr. Buss was a great businessman, but also that he really appreciated and valued you, as he did many people who worked for him, right?
Yes.
Myself
Yes.
included. I mean, I didn't work directly for Dr. Buss, but I always just felt this sort of, I don't know, incredible affection that I had for him, but respect both ways, and also that you stood up for yourself. You know, good for you. You know, I got 3 daughters. I'm telling them that all the time. You know, you gotta.
Yes.
Just because you were born a woman doesn't mean that you can take 78 cents on the dollar. Let's get realistic. So Claire, you know, let's talk about this show, Winning Time, a little bit.
Yes.
You know, you've been vocal about your disappointment, how certain characters have been portrayed in the show, the HBO show. So have many of us, myself included. You know, Kareem wrote a very deep and insightful piece. You know, Michael Cooper, Jamal Wilkes, Gary Beatty, a lot of people have spoken out because it just doesn't seem right to us, those of us who lived through it and knew these people, right? But nobody really has been more vocal, I think, than Jerry West, and rightly so. I just want to read a quote that Jerry said in the LA Times. He said, quote, "The series made us all, the Lakers, look like cartoon characters. They belittled something good." And then HBO's response was, they were clear that Winning Time is a work of, quote, fiction, with a disclaimer at the end of every episode. Okay. How can you make fiction really from real life people and real life situation? I mean, it's very disappointing to me. I'm sure it is to you too. And it's aggravating and sad.
Well, I felt so bad about the treatment when I did have an opportunity to read the first episode script.
Mm-hmm.
Jeanie Buss was kind enough to send it to me. Mm-hmm. And she told me that she didn't like the treatment so far as Dr. Buss was concerned, but I was free to do whatever I wanted. Mm-hmm. I read it. And when I read that the line said, when Claire Rothman was ready to meet Dr. Buss, she unbuttoned 3 buttons of her blouse. I thought, this is slimy, smarmy.
Yeah, no, it is. I'm laughing because it's absurd. I mean, it just, you know.
And in my conversations with Karen West, mm-hmm. I told her I thought they were cartoon characters.
Right.
Jerry Buss never stood on the top of the desk and shouted. He was a quiet man. You had to discern what displeased him. Mm-hmm. He never raised his voice. I never heard him curse. I'm sure there were times when he did. Mm-hmm. But as somebody wisely said, knowing him for 30 years, he cursed more in the first episode than he did in the 30 years.
Right. Yeah.
So
and I agree with you.
It's changed the character of a human being. And it's not fair to the memory of Bill Sharman, who was a beautiful human being and a very dear friend. It's not fair to Jerry West, mm-hmm. who's an icon and a very good friend, to make him such a character.
Yeah.
It's unfair.
Well, you know, it's a dramatization. They say it's not a documentary, but it's about a real live situation. Look, if they had created their own sort of universe and called it Winning Time, and it was some other team or some other city or whatever in some fictional way, you know, I think we could all be cool with that. But, you know, these are people we all worked with and loved and respected and you know, went into the trenches with, and it's just disappointing, I got to tell you. I mean, you know, as a photographer and someone, you know, I appreciate what they're trying to do in terms of the production value and making it look, quote unquote, as real as possible. But I think it's really confusing to the general public who were not part of the inner sanctum and the inner circle, because this is now their perception of what these people that we love were like.
That's the fear I have.
Yeah.
Will they say, oh, that's the real Jerry Buss.
Right.
That's the real Jerry West.
Right.
That's what he was really like.
Exactly. Well, look, I know Jeanie has her documentary coming out shortly, right?
Yeah.
After this, and I can't wait to see that. I've actually been helping, with some photo research. Magic's 4-part documentary, They Call Me Magic, on Apple TV. Plus, I encourage you to watch that, because that's his story. I mean, that's Magic telling his story, and he doesn't hold back. He really talks about everything from beginning to end, and I applaud him for that, because it's not easy, his story to talk about. I do have to ask you about Gabby Hoffman, because I like her as an actress. How weird was it just for you to watch somebody, it doesn't matter who, but playing you in a TV show? Is that weird?
It wasn't so much weird.
Yeah.
It was strange.
Yeah. Yeah.
If they search for a well-known actress who looked at the complete physical opposite of me, they couldn't have found one better than she.
Right. Yeah. Well, men's health.
There was a time when all of us smoked, but early in the 70s, I decided if I wanted to live, I better stop smoking. So when I see every character in it, lighting cigarettes one after the other, especially when it's me.
Yeah. I got you.
We should mention that they make a cartoon out of Frank Mariani.
Oh my God, yeah. I felt that the second they brought him on to the show.
My heart hurts for that man.
Yeah, and his family. I mean, Roberta, everybody that we know. And Dr. Buss too. Look, I think John C. Reilly is a great actor. I think he's doing what he can do with that part. But I mean, Dr. Buss isn't around to defend himself. It's just not fair, in my opinion. But do you feel that Gabby Hoffman got it right in terms of Men's Health described the way that she plays you as, quote, stoic pragmatism, which I thought was a great description, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, she's a good actress.
Yeah.
And she can only do as she's directed.
Sure.
She can't. So I think under the circumstances, she tries to represent what I would hope that I put across.
Right.
Fairness, really caring about the place. I mean, I had such freedom. I felt like it was my arena. I felt like my job was a combination of Snow White and Cinderella at the ball.
Right. And let's not forget that in places like Madison Square Garden and other major arenas, there are 3 or 4, sometimes 5 people doing the same job that one person were doing, right? Let's not forget that. So Claire, let's talk about Showtime. Okay, the era. Now, what were you most proud of during that era? What you, Dr. Buss, Jeanie, the whole organization, the whole family, what was created during that time? What can you take away from that?
It was magic. It was absolutely magical.
Yeah.
For sports, for music, everything we touched was successful.
Yeah.
There are problems because nothing is, but it was so exciting. To win 5 championships during my time in the 80s was so unbelievable. Having the All-Star game and seeing people who were now coming to visit our arena that I worked for.
Right.
Nick Maletti from Cleveland came.
Yeah.
And I was the gracious hostess.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Look at me. I'm happy. I had the All-Star game.
Yeah. But Claire, you never made it. This is my experience with you. You never made it about you. People respected you. Nobody like feared you. You ran a tight ship, right? You had to. I mean, the arena was booked, like 300 nights a year, I would think.
Not quite, but almost.
Pretty close. And, you had a lot of people working under you and depending on you. Your legacy, I mean, what do you feel your legacy is?
Well, I hope that it will be that while I ran a tight ship and I made a tough bargain, it was always fair, because a contract or an arrangement that is unpleasant for one party and successful for the other won't continue, and it won't bring you any joy. So I would hope that it would be that I did my very best, but that I was always fair.
Yeah. Well, I think anyone who's worked with you, worked around you, worked for you, negotiated with you or against you, I think everyone would feel that, honestly. And that's a wonderful legacy to leave. I also want to talk about maybe the legacy that you left with Jeanie, like taking her under your wing a little bit, and how you feel about where she is now as a female executive in sports.
I am so proud of that woman. I tell her every time I speak to her. And I didn't agree with Jerry's philosophy about his children. His philosophy was, we throw them in the pool. If they don't drown, they'll be a success. I thought that was too tough.
Yeah.
So I tried to help all of the children, and they don't mention any other children.
I know that's, yeah. I mean, that we shouldn't even waste our time talking about that show, honestly, because we know it wasn't the real story. So, but
I mean, including even Joanne Buss, that they make her a character.
So
also.
I know.
So we were a family. We shared our own lives and all of our lives together. I watched the kids grow up, more so with Jeanie and John, the oldest. John and I always had a very lovely relationship.
Yeah.
He had a tough time. He wasn't cut out to run a soccer team, and he didn't succeed at it. But Jeanie seemed to me to have her 2 feet planted solidly. And she would say, this is our family business. And it's my duty to see that it's successful and goes forward and wins games and satisfies season seat holders. And she became the face of the forum. And an outstanding PR.
Yeah. Did she ever reach out to you even now in retirement, just for a little advice or, I don't know, a little mentorship, anything?
We text and we talk.
Yeah.
And I have been there for her in her hardest times. And one of them, was when she had to displace her own brother.
Sure. Yeah. Very difficult decision.
But Jerry was so bright the way he left his estate that while he left Jim in charge of basketball, Jeanie was the governor to the NBA, and he gave her the right of veto, which she never used until they tried to unseat her.
I understand that. Well, she is definitely carrying on Dr. Buss's vision and his legacy, and to me, it's wonderful. Jeanie and I kind of started at the same time. I remember working with her and Lon, with the strings and the indoor volleyball and the soccer and all that crazy stuff that we used to do. Yeah, it was fun. Those days were so much fun. So I got to ask you, just as we're wrapping this thing up, I got to ask you about two people. All right. First person I have to ask you about is someone near and dear to my heart. And I know yours too, Lee Zeidman, who is now the president of Staples Center. Well, I'm sorry, Crypto.com Arena. I keep forgetting to call it the right name. Microsoft Theater, LA Live. Lee and I kind of started at the same time. He was in operations. I was, the photographer would have to come in and put strobes in the building and all that. Give me a couple of things, because Lee told a great story about when he went in to interview at the Forum, and I don't know if it was with you, that he actually interviewed for the wrong job.
That I don't know. He did an interview with me. He became highly recommended by someone that I knew who was associated in our field.
Yeah.
And I describe Lee as a beautiful, rough, unpolished diamond.
That is the most perfect definition of him. Yes, and his bark is a lot worse than his bite. I love him to death, but he's like your elementary school principal. You just like to this day I've known him 40 years and I still get intimidated. But he's a sweetheart and I love him to death. And what he's built. And he's been through some hard times himself.
Oh yes.
And and we all care about each other, and that's the most important. Yeah. So the other person I have to ask you about is Kobe Bryant. And my relationship with Kobe for 20 years and documenting his career. We did our book together.
Yeah.
What do you remember back in the early days of the young, brash, pre-Mamba? Kobe came to the Lakers in '96 and it's still at the Forum.
You have to remember, I left in '95.
Oh, okay, right.
I was no longer in charge. Yeah. So I only knew Kobe at arm's length. I think he knew who I was and I knew who he was.
Yeah.
He brought so much glory to the building, to everything that we did.
Yeah.
And, I said that we won 5 championships when I was there.
Yeah.
And because of the generosity of Jeanie Buss, he allowed us to get extra championship rings.
Oh, really?
So I got 2 for my husband.
That's what. Yeah.
And Jeanie Buss and Jeanie saw to it that when they had the 3-peat ring with the 3, they sent it to me as a gift.
That's beautiful.
Now, it was already several years since I had left the Forum.
Right. Yeah. Well, that just says what family does. And family takes care of family. Even if we move somewhere else, do something. You had left the Forum to go to Ticketmaster, right? To head Ticketmaster. So Claire, just to wrap up, tell me about retirement. Okay. I know you're living in Vegas, you and Ed, you're near your daughter and grandchildren, right?
My youngest grandson, my youngest grandson is 36, so he's still a little boy.
Right. And are you still active at all in any of the charities that you work with, the Music Center or any other charities or foundations?
Well, the Music Center has been wonderful to me. I make a donation every year to them, and they treat me as if I'm still on the board, although emeritus. I get emails from them. It's like they don't want to let go.
Yeah.
I certainly don't have the number of boards that I was on.
Yeah.
But for 40 years I was a member of the International Women's Forum. And there is a chapter like that here in Las Vegas. So when I came, they were gracious, and they gave me reciprocity, and
Oh,
I became a member.
that's fantastic. And you do what you can do, right? I mean,
Yes,
right.
yes.
That's wonderful.
So, am I active? Yeah, I've been more active since Wind Time came on because of all the things
Right.
that splashed my way.
Sure. No, I
But
understand.
living here during the pandemic was wonderful because not only did I have my daughter and my grandson, but Ed's daughter moved here to
Oh,
be
wow.
near us too.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting.
So
Yeah.
we had family that we could meet with and practice distancing. And we would walk together in the parks.
Yeah.
It's a quieter lifestyle.
Yeah, for sure.
But because people come to Las Vegas from everywhere, Andy, everyone is looking to meet people.
Mhm.
So if you expose yourself
Mhm.
To different groups,
Right.
you get to meet fantastic people.
Yeah. No, that's great. Hey, before we wrap up, I just have to ask you this one question, which I left out. You know, I came to LA as a huge hockey fan, right? I born and bred in Madison Square Garden, watching the Rangers since I was 6 years old. So, you know, the first professional team I gravitated towards was the Kings when I was still in school. And I'm still working for the Kings to this day, like 40 plus years. You got to be honest with me. Did you ever think in your lifetime that you would see the LA Kings win a Stanley Cup? I mean, I know they didn't win it at the Forum, but I was standing there on the ice at Staples Center in 2012, and Dustin Brown is lifting the cup, and I am literally seeing people that I remember from the Forum who are crying their eyes out, like somebody held aside. Now I can die. You know, it's like,
The most exciting time during my time was the miracle
on Manchester.
win
Oh yeah, with
on
Darrell
Manchester.
Evans. Oh my God, yeah, that was unbelievable. No, it was
But
great.
and
Yeah.
Andy, at the start of my career, a young lady that worked under me married the star of the Flyers.
Really?
So I had a connection
Yeah.
with, and I worried that he would get hurt and she wouldn't come to work.
That's something. Well, Claire, I got to tell you, we could go on, and maybe we'll do a part 2 at some point. But I'd love to see you and Ed in person sometime when I come through Vegas, and maybe have a
Please
nice
do.
meal together. But I just have to tell you how grateful I am for everything that happened and that you helped to happen for my career very early. And you know, for you to take the time today to spend with me to talk about all the great memories, you know, and lots to look forward to too, right? And you know, you've seen it, the cycle. Lakers are down right now. You've seen it happen, and they'll come back up, right? The Kings
Absolutely.
now have made the playoffs for the first time in how many years? And you
Yeah.
know, things come and go. So you know, we all share that sort of ebb and flow in sports. But it's just great to see you.
Well, Andy, just remember that everything that you uh, have, that you think I gave, I got back in equal measure from everybody, from their successes. Look, Lee started as an operations guy, and today he's a president.
Yeah. It's got to warm your heart. It really does.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, you look for people that are better than you,
Mhm.
not lesser.
Yeah. Well,
And then they go out as your emissaries. So you're my emissary.
oh, thank you, Claire. I love you guys, and I wish you good health and happiness, and just stay safe, of course, you know, from whatever's going around out here in LA and in Vegas, but we'll get through it. But so great to see you. Thanks so much for being a part of the Legends of Sport podcast.
Thank you for having me.
You're a
Bye.
sweetheart. Bye, Claire. Claire, thank you. You are the best. Can't thank you enough. And
Well, I hope you got in the things you
oh, I
wanted.
did. I had my script, my notes, you know,
Yes.
and my producer, Veronica, she did a lot of research. Um, read some good stuff about you. You know, there's not a lot about you out there. It's I had to go back to some stories that were written like in the 80s.
Yes.
Which
But
are fine. Yeah.
That Men's Health put out a few things.
Yes. Yeah.
And there's a couple of Hollywood ones that put out.
Yep. I read that one. And I have a big, big wad of notes over here. But I will let you know when this is going to come out. Of course, I'll send you all the links and you can send them out to people. We're going to promote it on social media. I'll also send it to Jeanie because I know she would love to see you and hear this. And I hope to get to see you soon. You know, it's always a welcome pleasure when I see your smiling face I keep calling it Staples Center. I can't call it crypto.com. Yeah. I'm sorry.
But every time Lee would give me his seats on the floor, right. You always came over to say hello and take pictures.
Of course. I see you. I see Joy Sharman, of course, Karen. You know, these are all, all family. It's like seeing my own family. So it's wonderful.
Yes. Well, we love you.
Love you too. And big hug to Ed as well. And I'll see you soon. Okay. But thanks a million for this.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye, sweetie.
Bye.
Well, folks, I hope you all enjoyed this conversation with the legendary Claire Rothman. It was so wonderful to see her and share stories of her trailblazing career and our shared history working at the Forum and the Showtime era. 93 years young. God bless Claire and Ed. I hope to see them both when I pass through Las Vegas sometime soon. So thanks as always to my producer and head researcher, Veronica Ahn. And remember, you can find us on the iHeart app and online, as well as Apple and Spotify and your favorite podcast platform. Folks, keep following us on Instagram at Legends of Sport, our Twitter at Legends_of_Sport. Our website is legendsofsport.net, and our YouTube and TikTok channels, Legends of Sport. My photography can be found on Instagram and Twitter at ADB Photo Inc. So we'll be back next week with another great episode. Until then, stay well and stay safe.